Good morning, gentlemen. Today we are going to be talking about games versus toys. Now, I've always had this idea of games and toys where a game is something you play the game. If I'm playing a game, I am playing the game. But a toy, you're not playing the toy. You're playing with the toy. The toy is being used for some other purpose. You're playing with it versus playing the actual thing. Now, this distinction is rather important and will connect back to D&D in ways that you can possibly even guess at now. But I kind of want to take you through the journey of this, of my thought over the past few days, as this had come up again recently. So, one of the things that people will struggle with is defining a game for a couple of reasons. One of which is if you're genuinely confused, you're running your D&D session, for example, and not really understanding that your session is a game. It's intended to be fun and have challenge. It's literally like any other game, like a video game or a card game or a board game or whatever. The same rules apply. All the same principles apply of having a game where there are conditions for winning, there are conditions for losing, and the players have to demonstrate some sort of skill or overcome challenges, that sort of thing, in order to achieve the win state instead of the loss state. So they will struggle to obtain the win state, and if they fail in their struggles, they lose. That's a game. It has specific rules for play that define what the valid actions are, what the conditions are for winning or losing, that sort of thing. Frankly, kind of straightforward. But I think people lose sight of this sometimes when they're running D&D and they sort of don't focus on that fact. And then the other side of this is there is actually a lot of incentive to lie about what people are doing. People will create products that are not games, but they want the prestige that comes with being a game, whatever limited prestige that is, to get people's money. Uh, One of the ways that this stood out really obviously in the culture is the old walking simulator concept. So originally, some years ago, walking simulator was this grievous insult that you've made like a piece of crap. Like your game is nothing, it's garbage. You just walk around, there's nothing here, it's meaningless. You're a liar, and claiming that it's a game makes you evil. You're an evil person for saying so. But the funny thing is, in when people finally got forced into honesty because of, for example, Steam has tags, so people would just tag things as walking simulator. And now the biggest fu. You have no choice but to face up to the facts that you did not make a game, you made a walking simulator. And what happened? Massively popular genre. Massively popular genre. Now it's actually a cool thing because it doesn't have to be a game. It's actually okay that it's not a game. It can be a toy. It can be fun for other reasons. Things don't have to be games just because they're an entertainment experience where you interact with it. Uh, they can be just a toy. It's actually completely fine. This honesty was better for everyone. Everyone benefited because now people were being honest about what they were trying to create, what they were trying to do, what the goal of the product they were making was, and it made it possible to make them the best that they could be. So there's this pernicious idea that something is better, like these things are better than, like a game is better than a toy for some reason, but that's not actually true. It's more important to be honest and live up to your potential rather than try to steal glory from someone else, basically. And I think this is an idea that will come back around at some point here in this conversation about the idea of games versus toys. And one of the nice things about this is that you see that the gatekeeping concept, of course, during the walking simulator discussions, it's, oh, you're trying to gatekeep the concept of games. It's like, well, yes. The thing is, gatekeeping is not bad. It's actually a good thing. It is one of the funny things is that the idea of like gates, walls, keeps. Uh, this is the fundamental premise of life itself. Like the defining characteristic of a living thing is is the wall, the cell wall that surrounds it. Like walls are good. They they're the best thing there could possibly be. And the goal is not to shut out the outside world completely, but it's to establish a equilibrium that the stuff inside of the wall and the stuff outside the wall can coexist peacefully instead of one of them destroying the other or being destroyed by the other. Really, typically the smaller thing inside of the wall is what's going to be destroyed completely. So gatekeeping is specifically about survival. If you are being gate kept, you may as well be called a murderer or worse. Uh, so that's something. This is sort of funny because the idea there's like the social justice ideas, but like true social justice is actually about having rules for the social interactions between life forms, cells, humans, cities, states, countries, and so on. The rules that they interact with are what maintains justice. That's what justice is. But anyway, that's a bit of a digression into an almost political side of this, and you could certainly extend this political component of this further. But I don't think that's a very interesting focus for this video. And one other aspect to get into before I get to the main point about how this connects to D&D is so I was talking about the idea of games versus toys, and one of the examples that I like to call back to is the Civilization games, the computer games, because, and this is a 4X sort of game, a real-time, turn-based strategy game rather, control lots of stuff. The gameplay, frankly, isn't good because the AI is terrible and mostly just cheats. And, it's not entirely clear that the game would be good even if the AI was better. The lower difficulty settings are all pretty much trivial, and you could beat them by taking actions at random. And the harder difficulty settings are pretty much all about trying to overcome the cheating that the computer did via exploiting weird game mechanics. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel natural. So even to the extent that it is a game on the harder settings, it is not a good one. So that's another thing to distinguish, is that a game that is, it does have rules, it does impose challenges, but they're not really interesting or fun to overcome. That's just a bad game. It doesn't mean it's not a game, it means it's a bad game. So something that is a bad game does not make it a toy. There's still a difference between games and toys. But one of the key components of this is the idea that you could self-impose rules while you're playing with Civilization. So Civilization, on most of its settings, it's just a toy because there's no challenge. But you could self-impose certain restrictions. Like, I'm going to try to do I'm going to try to win with a science victory under these conditions, and that actually becomes an interesting challenge. Some of the achievements in the game and some of the scenarios in those games do actually end up fulfilling the criteria of now it really turns the toy into a game, and it's actually a fun game to play as a result. But you could also look at this as like, well, I could impose a goal for myself for running. Like, I want to run a mile in 10 minutes or something. Technically, yes, that's a game. There's two problems. One, it's not a very good game because there's really only one strategy, which is just gain more endurance. So the game is not fun as a game. And the second thing is, any kind of self-imposed rules are, I mean, yes, you can self-impose rules to create a game, but if I buy a product, I'm expecting that the people who made that product to have done the hard work of making something a game. If I have to impose my own rules, then you're abdicating your responsibility and duty, and you're lying to me. You're selling me something that's garbage. And now we can start connecting this back to D&D a bit here, because you can see the rule zero fallacy, as sometimes people call it, the idea that I could impose rules, or I could fix the product to turn it into a game, because it's not a game to begin with, it's just a toy, means that it's fine. But obviously that's terrible, that's nonsense. I'm not here to buy a toy, I'm here to buy a game. You are starting to perhaps see where this is going to connect to the idea of D&D, is the idea of playing D&D the game versus playing with D&D the toy. And I think this really stands out with the idea of new school and old school, or old school modern and modern play. This pretty much wipes the floor and says, well, there's no such thing as old school or modern or new school. These things don't exist. There's only the actual game of D&D, which is sometimes vaguely referred to as old school, and then there's playing with D&D, which is the new school thing, where you're not really playing a game, you're trying to create a story or something. You're just using the pieces of the game to play with it as if they're a toy. You're smashing action figures together. There's no rules, or to the extent that there are rules, they don't matter enough for it to be a structured activity like a game. Well, there you have it. I mean, that's the central premise. So these modern products are simply not games at all. It's not a question about whether they're a different type of game. They are simply not a game, period. They are a toy. And again, we go back to the beginning where I was talking about how toys versus games, it's not a bad thing. A game is not necessarily better than a toy in terms of how you spend your time or experience. But if these things can be honest about what they are, everyone will be better off. So if you could create your D&D that was and determine that yes, this is a game. It is a game foremost, first and foremost, and then have those people play that, and then have other people say, okay, this is not D&D anymore. This is some kind of toy product, and we have different goals, and our purpose here is completely different. Both groups would be happier, and you would no longer need this deception of trying to trick people from the other camp into playing with you when they don't actually want to do that. Now that I've said this, I do think there's the idea where people might get joy out of playing a game, and they might also get joy out of playing a toy. And the actual experience of playing D&D, for example, could be a mix of both activities, which does muddy the waters a bit. That said, I also believe that you can preference one or the other, and that this is generally to everyone's benefit to make it absolutely clear which one you're going to be preferencing. Because I think there will come a time where it'll sort of break the camel's back, where, well, we were mostly playing a game, but whenever it really counted, we didn't. Or we were mostly having fun with a toy, but then every once in a while, suddenly the game rules would come in and total kill the party. You can imagine these two dissenting voices. I do think there is certainly a lot of value in distinguishing between the two styles. And they're not, the thing is, they're not actually styles. They are fundamentally different concepts and goals which have opposed purposes. Similarly to how a video game, and a walking simulator, for example, are using digital media as the medium, they are still totally different products with a completely different purpose. Similarly, the medium of playing at a table with dice and so on, and even that varies, but just because the medium is the same does not mean that they're different styles or different flavors of the same thing. They're actually a completely different thing. So that is the main point. I do want to get into just a couple other things here. The idea of 5th edition as being Grognard house rules. This is something that's come up just because the shepherds of the game, people coming from playing 5e and coming back to old school, are routinely disappointed because they discover that the people in the old school are not old school. The only thing that's old school about them is that they are using OD&D or AD&D or some other game system to play with D&D instead of play D&D. That no matter, despite the fact that they're using these older versions, that doesn't change anything. They're still engaging with the game in a 5th edition style. So this is, people get confused when all of a sudden milestone leveling is being used essentially in an old game, or gold doesn't actually matter, or whatever. I don't know. These things come up in terms of the rules and what people are actually doing. Certain rules get ignored, certain rules get used, and it's kind of like, why are you even using this? It seems like you're just getting pleasure out of using the rules, but you're still not actually playing the game. You're just playing with the game and treating it as a toy. And I mean, I have some thoughts about why this is. I really think that there's a very small minority of people who are actually good and capable of running games. For example, some of the stuff with linear play. I mean, linear play is just a concession to the reality that most people are not good at creating game levels. And they are also not, even if they were good at it, it takes a lot of time to make a good game level, which most people don't have. They just don't have enough time. They have their kids, they have their work, they have other things going on in their life, and they can't set aside 40 hours to make a 4-hour dungeon. I really think you are looking at numbers like that, at 10 times, 10 hours for every 1 hour of play. Well, that's my opinion. We're starting to get a little, my ideas works. Those ideas could change. But I think that's, for the most part, all I have to say. Obviously, I did say earlier that this, as with all true things, you can kind of notice the political implications of this, and you could probably write some kind of political manifesto based on these ideas. For example, applying this toy versus game concept to language and the way people use language versus play with language, attempting to, manipulate meaning. But I leave that to someone else to make jokes about or whatever. And hopefully this was interesting. Food for thought. Thank you for watching. Farewell, gentlemen. Until next time.